In this video, we're going to take a look at modifying the layout of screens within Clarity. The specific area of focus will be on project screens, but the technique applies to any other object. So if I look at a particular project and see the existing layout, I may want to make changes on this. The changes can be simple, like changing the name of a field. They can be a little bit more complicated, like moving things around and moving fields from one section to another or one page to another. Could be more complex, like adding additional subpages. You can even modify the tabs across the top and a number of other things. So we're going to take a look at each of these in turn. Most of them are fairly straightforward. There are a few gotchas here and there that I'll try and point out as we go. So if I just want to change something easy, I can go to the administration module and look for the object that I want and go to the project object in this case and drill into it. And from there I go to the Views tab. Now there's also a shortcut to this. Under the administration menu there's an entry under Studio called Views, and it gets you to a list of basically all the different configurable views, including all the things that you see here: the project list page, the program properties, project properties, and so on. So you can go through that. Once you do that, you'll land on this same page that we're on now. I've actually created a favorite. I've added the current to my favorites, and I've got project properties. I can jump right to the properties tab and then from there go to whichever tab that I want. So however you navigate, you're going to end up on this screen. You want to make sure that you are looking at the right partition. If that's unclear, go look at my video on partitions. So in the AstraZeneca A's IT partition, I'm going to go to Layout Edit. Now, it's important to recognize the way this is configured. I've got project properties and program properties. Programs are different than projects. They're actually the same object, but they're treated differently in a number of different ways. Then I have the list page, which includes the filter. I've got my projects. I've got a program list. I've got a sub-project list, and templates, and so on. So all of these things are configurable however you want them to look. The layout create is when you're creating a new, whatever this is, project, program, etc. Layout edit is for an existing one, and that's the screen that we were just looking at here. The actions menu is outside the scope of this video, and then on the far right we've got a list of all the fields. So if you are simply changing the name of a field, then you're going to go to the Fields link. And in the Fields page, what you'll see is a list of all of the attributes that are currently being displayed anywhere for this object. And for some reason, this particular screen takes an awfully long time to redraw most of the time. So here I'm seeing all of the attributes and their current property label. So it's important to recognize that the attribute name can be different than the attribute label. The label is what you see on the screen. So for example, ACWP is the name of the attribute, but on the screen you'll see actual cost parentheses ACWP. If you're trying to find a particular attribute and all you know to go by is what you see on the screen, when you get to the Fields page, you're going to have to scroll carefully down the page and look for that value in this column. Unfortunately, if you do a search on this page, it does not search for stuff within the text boxes. It will search for all of this stuff and not find it. In addition, I can't sort this view, so I cannot sort alphabetically by this label column so that I can search for it that way. So the only thing you can do is to scroll down and keep watching, because even if you're looking for something that seems like it ought to be the attribute name, you're looking alphabetically by attribute name. And for example, I've got goal and I've got primary goal alignment. So if I was looking for primary goal alignment down here in the P's, I'm not going to find it. So I've got to scroll very carefully until I see it over there. Also, the screen by default is only showing you selected attributes, only the ones that are currently selected to be displayed somewhere. So you can change that to all, or you can look at only the ones that aren't being displayed in order to change a label. If you change the label here, it'll change everywhere that attribute is used within this partition. If I drill into one of these attributes, and this one's kind of boring, I can define the label here as well, but I can also define a hint which will be displayed on the screen wherever it's displayed, and I can decide whether I want the hint above or below. And I can also define a tooltip, which is basically a mouse rollover. So when I roll the mouse onto this field, the tooltip will pop up on the screen. Use those very sparingly. They get really annoying very quickly. I can also choose to make this a default, define a default, several other things. This is a checkbox data type, so it's kind of boring. One of the things that you can define in here is whether it's a single select or a multi-select, if it's a data type lookup. So that's very useful. You can also change the date appearance for date data. So I can choose date and time instead of just the day. Okay, so if I go back to my view screen, like I said, getting back to this screen tends to take a while. So I'll go back here to views, and I'll go into layout edit. So now in the layout edit, what I get is a list of all the subpages. So if I look at my project, I'm on the project summary page. There's also description, business alignment, service and site impact, and I've got description, business alignment, service and site impact. Now notice schedule and performance wasn't showing up in my list of subpages here. That's because that particular subpage is not being displayed. To do that, I go over here to the properties of this subpage, and I define a display condition. And the display condition that I've defined is 1 equals 0, which means it will only be displayed if the number 1 is equal to the number 0, which it never is. If I click on that, I can come in here and clear it, delete it, redefine it. If I'm adding this in, I've got to put 2 equals because that's a programmer notation. So 1 equals 0 is a logical test. And that prevents this page from ever being displayed unless I change it. Now I can also make this secure. That will enable me to define rights for this subpage. And I can define display conditions like only display if the user is a member of a particular security group. So there's a number of different ways that you can control whether or not a given page appears within the object. So back to the simple stuff. If I want to go in here and I want set ISID to appear at the bottom of this column instead of where in the middle where it is, it's pretty straightforward. I got to make sure I got the right schedule, or sorry, the right section. This is the project header section of the project summary subpage. So I am on the schedule and performance subpage. So I got to go back to the top, go to the project summary subpage, and I will drill into that and go to the project header section. And now I see section over here on the right. I can click the properties of this section, and I see both of the columns. I can go to set ISID, and off the edge of my screen I can click the down arrow and put it at the bottom. And once I do that and I click save and I go back to this screen and I refresh, the set ISID field is now down at the bottom where I put it. So changing the layout is very simple. There are a couple of gotchas. If you have a field that is a required field like project type, I can't remove it from the screen. If I take it off here and I take it off there, now I've got to be careful. I may have just said a misstatement, but if I save this, yeah, that one's okay. I can remove that one. The reason is there are two different types of mandatory fields. So let me put that one back where it is. Now, if I want this all the way at the top, I can move it, click, 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 click a bunch of times, or I can select all of these and move them down, and that puts it at the top. So this is a mandatory field, but not really. So there are two areas where a field can be made mandatory. One is the definition of the attribute itself, and one is back on that fields page that we just looked at. So in the case of project type, it is not defined as a mandatory field. And I strongly urge you to keep those to a very, very minimal set. Only make something absolutely mandatory if it's always, always absolutely necessary. And that means across partitions, across user communities, always has to be there. If you want something to be mandatory only within the context of a given partition, or only when you land on a certain screen you have to provide a value, then you can go to the fields page, go to properties, and click it there as being required. And required is different than mandatory. Required means when I land on a page that has that attribute displayed, I have to put a value in it in order to save the page. But mandatory means I can't create an instance of the object without providing a value for that attribute. So it has to be on the project create page, and you cannot remove it from the views. If you try to remove it from a view here, it won't let you unless you're putting it somewhere else. So it always has to be displayed. Okay, so I think that is a reasonable overview of how you do that. Trying to think if there's anything else urgent that I need to say. Oh yeah, if you want a new section, of course you can define all kinds of things here, and I'm rapidly running out of time. But if I go to the top of this, if I look at a given subpage and click on its properties, then I see a list of all the sections. I can move them up and down as I wish. If I want to create new sections, then I go to the subpage itself and I say create sections. So I can create as many as I want. I can go to the properties of this subpage and reorder them, and I can drill into the properties of the subpage in order to make it secure or set the display conditions. So that's a quick look at updating views in Clarity, and hopefully that made sense and now you understand it. So you rock.